This is the Capitol Rundown.
But it's sort of all up in the air right now as to whether lame duck will be successful or basically uneventful.
You have to build this party, okay? And I don't want a strong division.
I've served in divided governments, and I think you can still govern this country as a result of that.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Siobhan Klemfer. The holiday season is in full swing, as are the political happenings around the state of Michigan. And the Mitten had a major visitor this week. President Joe Biden made a stop in Bay City to talk about the expansion of a semiconductor plant. He says the facility will create thousands of jobs and also help the U.S. become less reliant on other countries. Governor Gretchen Whitmer and other state officials toured the facility with the president. During the walkthrough, Mr. Biden talked about plans to invest $300 million to expand the plant. He also talked about spending millions to invest in charging stations across the state and country. As for this microchip plant, he called it a big deal.
People want to come here and invest here. Absolutely. And there's a couple reasons why. Because of you guys. Not a joke. We have the best workforce in the world.
The plant will be run by a South Korean company, and with the extra funds, the plant is projected to quadruple its production in the coming years. A battle looms in the Michigan Republican Party as nearly a dozen candidates are eyeing a run for state party chair. The current co-chair of the state GOP, who kicked in $5 million of his own money the last election cycle, will not run again. So this week, the rundown is looking at possible replacements. The latest candidate is defeated candidate for Secretary of State Kristina Karamo. She joins defeated candidate Matt DePerno and Garrett Soldano, who are running as a team. Lena Epstein is also running. She's a former member of the U of M Board of Regents. Former GOP lawmaker Rocky Rachkovsky might also run. Former Congressman Pete Hoekstra could run as well. And this week, he told the rundown he would like former President Donald Trump to stay out of the issue. The rundown took that to the experts to see if that's likely to happen.
You have to build this party, okay? And I don't want a strong division coming out of a convention. The divides are deep enough. We don't have to put them any deeper. I'd suggest to him he's got friends on both sides here. It's probably best for him to stay out of this.
Do you think for 1 second that Donald Trump will take the advice of Pete Hoekstra?
No. Donald Trump generally takes advice only from himself.
There are 5 other candidates with little name recognition also vying for the spot, but many believe President Trump's pick will likely get the top spot at the head of the state party. Meanwhile, a Republican bill that cleared committee in the state House this week would move Michigan to the front of the line for presidential primaries. Currently, New Hampshire is traditionally first in the nation, holding its primaries on the second Tuesday in March. However, this bill would hold the Michigan primary in February. It was discharged from committee, which is a possible sign that lawmakers want it done quickly. Coming up next on the rundown, we sit down with our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic to discuss the latest on the Michigan political scene, including what the lame duck session could entail for the state. Stay with us. It was another politically filled week here in Michigan. Our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic is here for you now to discuss the latest legislation proposals, including what lawmakers may try to do before the new legislature begins their term. Take a listen.
In years past, Michigan really hasn't been too relevant in the race for president, as our primary was buried basically in the month of March, and nobody much paid attention because other states were voting on the same day, so it was basically a wash. Now comes President Biden and others, including Governor Whitmer, U.S. Senator Stabenow, and Debbie Dingell, the U.S. congressperson, who are basically saying, you know what, Michigan ought to be moved to the front of the line, especially over states like New Hampshire and Iowa. Not exactly a diverse state with a varied number of people there. Michigan is diverse. All sorts of different ethnic groups are here. And so the governor and others making the argument this weekend to the Democratic National Committee that Michigan ought to be in the frontier, maybe one of the first states to go, rather than lost in the middle. Will this happen? Well, of course, Iowa and New Hampshire are not going to take this lying down because they have enjoyed for years all of the media attention of every candidate and his or her uncle coming into the state to campaign. Michigan would like to replicate that, but first they've got to get the national party to go along with it, and that's a question mark. But with the president saying that we need to find states that are more diverse and put them at the head of the line, that certainly is a boost for Michigan. The lame duck session is underway. The question is, how long will it last? And more importantly, what will they do, if anything, to you, to help you or, in some cases, hurt you? We simply don't know. The Republican Speaker of the House, Jason Wentworth, told the media this week that basically he went to the governor with a shopping list of 30 issues that he wanted to send to her. She wrote back to him, reportedly, that she could only sign 3 of those bills, and therefore, basically, there was nothing to work on. However, there is talk about a supplemental budget bill, some extra money for some extra, perhaps, job-growing projects around the state, but it's sort of all up in the air right now as to whether lame duck will be successful or basically uneventful.
Tim, thank you. Coming up on the Capitol Rundown, we will have the latest announcement from Pat O'Keefe, a member of the Michigan State Board of Trustees. He is out. Got those details for you and more coming up next. State lawmakers are counting down the days before both chambers of the state legislature are taken over by Democrats, and Democrats are already laying out a roadmap of where they want to steer the state next year. However, state Republicans still have a few weeks to try and push legislation through. It's all part of the lame duck session that is now officially underway at the state capitol. Moving the state's primary is a major Republican push, as we talked about at the top of the show. When it comes to Democrats, they're pushing legislation on a range of topics. The Michigan Senate Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety approved a bipartisan plan this week aimed at protecting Michigan residents from deadly drugs by cracking down on heroin and fentanyl dealers. The package includes a reclassification that would allow stricter sentencing recommendations for those caught producing or distributing heroin and fentanyl. One Democrat in the state house introduced a resolution to create state-run utilities across Michigan. A state public utility board would use eminent domain to purchase all electric and natural gas facilities in the state. It would then be required within 18 months to lower rates for residential customers, create widespread electric vehicle infrastructure, and invest in renewable energy. Speaking of renewable energy, a different bill introduced by State House Democrats would create an aggressive timeline for Michigan's power utilities to go green. Right now, power companies need to make sure their energy portfolios are at least 15% renewable. This bill would raise that requirement to 25% by 2025, 50% by 2027, 75% by 2031, and 100% renewable by 2035. Pat O'Keefe resigned his seat from the Michigan State University Board of Trustees after making an announcement in a letter to Governor Gretchen Whitmer earlier this week. The state of Michigan issued a statement saying it will search for someone to appoint to the board who will stand up for the values, partnership, and leadership at MSU. O'Keefe's resignation comes as the board faces criticism for its handling of Title IX reporting and the departure of University President Samuel Stanley. When Stanley announced his resignation, he specifically said he could no longer work with the board as it was constituted. The Michigan State Board of Canvassers met this week to certify the results of the 2022 general election. However, many people who attended claimed election misconduct, even though they offered no proof. The board, which is made up of 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, spent time hearing statements alleging election misconduct. Republican Secretary of State candidate Kristina Karamo, who lost by more than 12 percentage points, joined the ranks of protest.
I am totally against the certification of this election. How is it that when citizens bring these very reasonable complaints forward, they're instead demonized?
However, the board maintained its decision despite one member of the public being removed. Coming up next on the Capitol Rundown, U.S. Representative Alyssa Slotkin was part of a congressional delegation that made a trip overseas over the Thanksgiving holiday. We'll tell you what they accomplished coming up next. Welcome back. He's a former defense secretary, a U.S. budget director, and leader of our nation's CIA. Leon Panetta also served as the chief of staff for President Bill Clinton. This week, Lauren Thompson sat down with him one-on-one to get his take on the midterm election and overall outlook for our country. Take a listen as he weighs in on a political insight that few others have to offer.
If you don't mind, I'd like to start with the midterm election and your take on that. You know, the Republicans were hoping for a red wave, bracing for it, didn't really come through. Did that surprise you?
You know, I was very encouraged by the results of the midterm elections. Over 100 million Americans turned out to vote. And they sent a message. They don't like extremism. They don't like election deniers. They really want both parties to work together. We have a divided government as a result of this election. The House is Republican, the Senate is Democratic. I've served in divided governments, and I think you can still govern this country as a result of that.
Republicans already are talking about launching investigations into, Biden family, Hunter Biden specifically. Do you think the Democrats set precedent for that under the Trump administration, and going forward, this is the type of thing we'll see under a divided government where one party is investigating the party holding the White House? Both parties, unfortunately, moved to the extremes these last number of years. I think Republicans certainly moved to the right. Democrats have moved to the left, and the result of that was that it made it very difficult to govern at the center, where you have to find compromise and consensus in a democracy. What do you think the number one issue facing our country right now is?
Polarization really has concerned me, because what happened on January 6th with the attack on the U.S. Capitol is something that I never thought I would see happen in my lifetime. And it really showed us how fragile democracy is. I really think it's important for both parties to understand that they need to unify to govern this country. They need to work together. If they fail to govern, and if there's gridlock, then I think all they've done is created the threat that our democracy may not survive.
And that would be the ultimate fall of the United States.
I think in the 21st century, we can choose one of two paths. We can have a country in renaissance. I think America could be the strongest country on the face of the earth, or we could be a country in decline. If we allow our hates and our prejudices and our fears to dominate, I think we'll go the way of past empires. That's a reality.
A congressional delegation, which includes U.S. Representative Elissa Slotkin, continued its tour of the Middle East this week, and this included stops in Italy, Jordan, Kuwait, Iraq, and Lebanon. During their visit, they met with various groups of U.S. forces, along with members of the new Iraqi government. After leaving Baghdad, Slotkin and the delegation met with minority groups who bore the brunt of ISIS. The group is now headed back home following more than a week of holiday fellowship with service members and veterans. Coming up next, the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act made waves this week on the federal stage, but what does that mean for marriages here in Michigan? We'll discuss that after the break. This week, the U.S. Senate passed legislation to protect same-sex and interracial marriage. Called the Respect for Marriage Act, it's being called a landmark bipartisan vote. But what does it mean for marriage in the state of Michigan? MLive political reporter Jordan Hermany is here for you now to break it all down.
With the Respect for Marriage Act being passed this week in Congress, what it means for Michigan is basically keeping status quo as it stands. Passing the Respect for Marriage Act is effectively a way to prevent what happened with abortion and the Dobbs ruling from happening to Michigan with the Obergefell ruling, which, you know, that came up in light of the Dobbs ruling, which overturned Roe v. Wade. Justice Clarence Thomas said, you know, if we're going to look at abortion through this lens, maybe we should revisit other court cases, such as ones that look at contraception, birth control, and gay marriage. So this is effectively preempting any sort of overturn of that court case, and basically keeps it so that Michigan does not in anyway sort of come back to its the laws that are on the books should something happen to the Obergefell court case. The reason why we find ourselves again returning to the question of should we legalize same-sex marriage, it isn't a question of should we legalize same-sex marriage, more that it is a point to reaffirm status quo in a sense. For years we took the Roe versus Wade decision as law, despite the fact that it wasn't law. And as we saw this past summer with Dobbs overturning the Roe decision, it put a bunch of states into a sort of frenzy because all of a sudden, Michigan among them, we were revisiting laws that had been on the books for decades that had never really been used. So you look to gay marriage. Michigan currently, it has a constitutional amendment, which in 2004, voters, nearly 60% of them, voted to ban altogether same-sex marriages and civil partnerships, including the right to recognize those partnerships. So this at the federal level, again, going back, it's not that obviously we practice any of that law now. That was clearly overturned in the Obergefell v. Hodges case, which legalized same-sex marriage throughout the country. This is just an affirmation that that court case still stands and that what happened to Roe with the Dobbs decision this past summer could not happen to something like same-sex marriage or interracial marriage for that matter. That federal law does also address that and reaffirms the right to interracial marriage as well.
Finally this weekend here on the Capitol Rundown, a look into the new Visitor Center at our state capitol. Heritage Hall is the new welcome center, and while it's been open since July, an official dedication ceremony took place this week. The building offers a new entrance and 35,000 square feet of history. An official from the Michigan State Capitol Commission says he was overwhelmed with the turnout from the event and can't wait for visitors to check it out. If you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we've got just the thing. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email each week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera at the screen right now. That will take you to the sign up page, or you can head to WLNS.com/newsletters. And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown.